Hello and welcome back to the 2024 season of Tournament After Action Reports of the Astrometeorm with your host, Joshi. Today we're going to be going over the last tournament I went to this Sunday, where I went to the New Year, New Wa, hosted by the Githammer folks over at the Squad Marks HQ in the greater Los Angeles area. Before we get too far into it, I do want to give out some special thank yous. Firstly, of course, to Michael Humphrey and the Githammer Club. They've recently invited me to join them at the California Team Championships, where I will be competing alongside one of the four or maybe five teams that they're planning on bringing to that event. They hosted this RTT as a way for a lot of their members to meet each other, as well as just make sure that everybody has an opportunity to continue playing. We were hoping it was going to be after the data slate, but as everybody knows, did not come out last Thursday as people were expecting, and so we are still waiting on that to see what kind of list people are planning to bring to CTC. Also, want to give a quick shout out to the venue, Squad Marks HQ, in the greater Los Angeles area as well. I know they have a great system whereby you can get a membership with them in order to use their space as much as you want, and also to get some fantastic discounts off of Warhammer and other tabletop gaming products. I'll go ahead and put a link to their website in the description. Strongly recommend doing it if you are planning to do anything in the area. They have some of the best prices that you can get on basically anything you want for your Warhammer 40k, your tabletop, your bolt action, basically anything that you would want to do on a table. They will be able to help you out with it. Lastly, I know that for this event, a number of players actually brought their own terrain to make sure that we had enough things to set up for all of the tables, and I did want to give a shout out to everybody who did participate in that and brought out their own. Now, before we start talking about what I was doing at the event, let's have an opportunity to talk about what the event was looking like. Naturally, this event was run by Githammer, a club down here in the greater LA area as well, and of the 34 people who participated in this RTT, 15 of them were running the Githammer club tag going into it. And I know I probably should have as well. They have a really fun uniform where everybody has the same Hawaiian shirt that everybody wears to the event. So there's a lot of people rocking around in these blue Hawaiian shirts, which was awesome. Githammer has been described to me by one of the members as a group of players who love playing the game, and they'll do their best at events, but they aren't necessarily going to be the most competitive team out there. And so we got to see, of the 15 players, we got to see people take the entire event, but also get dead last. So it was the entire gamut of people who are coming out, some of them for their first event, others coming out with a little bit more experience as well. Overall, though, I would not say this was the most competitive RTT I've gone to in the greater Los Angeles area, where we do have a lot of Xenos Petting Zoo players who are consistently doing well at not just the local GTs, but also GTs around the greater United States, and I know some of them even travel internationally. We only had one player coming in here in the top 500 players, and I was the only player beyond that who's also in the top 1,000 on the ITC ranking. Now, that doesn't mean that people here were pushovers. Almost everyone, I would say about 25 or so of the players were tournament veterans. I had played against many of them before. I recognized a lot of the names, but we did have a fair number of people who are coming out who did not have a ranking for the 2023 ITC season. As for the terrain, as I've talked about before, on the West Coast, or at least in the California area, we continue to use player-placed terrain based on the FLG settings. What that means is both players will have the same number of terrain pieces that they can place, but you cannot place a ruin within 5 inches of another ruin. You cannot place a crate or a forest within 4 inches of a ruin, and you cannot place a ruin within 4 inches of the edge of the board, but you can place ruins, woods, and craters towards the edge of the board. One of the things that I did know about this tournament going into it is Squad Marks tends to use what is called battle-ready terrain. I'll go ahead and throw up a picture on screen so you can see it. One of the things that I do like about this is it is very, very easy to kind of take wherever you want. It's foldable, it's cardboard, and you can take it to basically anything you want if you know that there's not going to be terrain that you like using. However, one of the things about this terrain setup is because these are the cardboard pieces, they're a little bit smaller than a lot of like the FLG terrain I'm used to using. And so what it does mean is you have a lot of opportunities to create very large firing lanes. And we'll talk about what that changed about my list going forward. But one of the ways that they did try and make up for this was the forests that we were using were also obscuring. They had basically the same way that you would play a ruin, where if you were not in the footprint, you could not see in or see out because they were not going to be able to see from one side of the forest to the other with neither of them touching inside. Now, with that in mind, let's go over the list that I actually brought. Before I actually talk about anything about the list itself, I was a little bit inspired by, and several of the other guard players who were at this event were also inspired by, the recent success of Richard Kotsar at the LVO, the Las Vegas Open, where he ended up going 7-1 and getting 6th overall in the entire tournament. Now, my list is obviously not a carbon copy of it. There's a lot of models that he has that I don't have that I'm trying to build up in order to be able to play them in a future event and maybe even take to CTC, obviously depending on what the data slate brings us. However, the units I did bring, I always bring Gaunt's Ghost to basically every list I build. It's the first thing I do. It's 100 points. They have precision, they have blown up, they have stealth, they have benefit of cover. They have basically every rule that you could possibly think of baked into one unit. And with the up-down, they are one of the most versatile and best scoring units, and they're also pretty good at taking down characters in pretty much any situation you can imagine. After that, I brought Lord Solar for the redeploys, the extra CP, and the ability to order any unit in the Astra Militarum Codex. I also brought Ursula Creed. Just gives you the free stratagem. You use Fields of Fire over and over, and you get extra AP on a single target after the first thing is shot. I also brought 2 Death Corps Marshals. They give the 5 of Feel No Pain to a Death Corps of Krieg Battleline unit that they are joined to, as well as the once per game Insane Bravery. They're just really good. They make you really resistant to shooting, but not as resistant melee, because you don't have like the cover just doesn't work in melee, but they are still a very good unit that I like to bring every time I bring a 20-man block of Death Corps of Krieg. Of course, in order to complete the Lord Solar Blob, you need the Platoon Command Squad, and I equipped it with a Mortar, a Master Fox, and a Medipack, and this is just a way to give Lord Solar a 24-inch range on all of his orders, and then I would join them with 1 unit of 10 infantry, also with a Mortar, so that you can use them in order to give out those Fields of Fire. And if your opponent doesn't have any indirect, you don't need to put Creed with another unit. Just having the once per turn free stratagem is awesome. The last Astra Militarum character I brought for this one was a Regimental Enginseer, and of course you give D3 wounds back every single time you give a 4+ invul to a vehicle within 3 inches, and if he dies within a certain range, I think it's 6 inches, might be 12 inches, I don't really know, I'd have to look it up, he gets very angry that you killed a vehicle, and he gets a bunch of extra melee attacks, which is cool. It doesn't come up all that often in a relevant way, but he oftentimes has enough attacks that he can actually do something in melee. We already touched on this before the battle line. I had the 2 units of 20 Death Corps of Krieg with the fixings, double Melta, double Plasma, double Grenade Launcher, and the sergeants with plasma pistols and power swords, and they're just super, super hard to shift. They already have the 5 of Feel No Pain from the Marshal, but every single time you kill one, they're below starting strength, they get +1 to hit. They're below half strength, they get +1 to wound. And as long as they have the Medipack still alive, they are reviving D3 models per turn. They're just really, really hard to get rid of. And so once you get them on an objective, you're really going to take some dedicated anti-infantry and a large volume of attacks in order to kill them. After that, we had the 1 unit of 10 infantry squad with a mortar. These guys are just chilling out with Lord Solar and Platoon Command Squad, and then you get the 2 mortars that can pick and choose their targets for Fields of Fire. After that, we had a unit of 5 Scions with the Melta-Gun, Plasma Gun, and the Sergeant with a Plasma Pistol and Power Fist. They are really good action monkeys. You drop them anywhere you want. It's a pretty easy way to get behind enemy lines, deploy teleport homers. Basically, you drop them in a spot, and your opponent's going to have to really, really work to remove them from the board just because they are in spots where they're going to hide. They're not going to be easy to see a lot of the time. Similarly, this is our first event that we took a Cyclops demolition vehicle to, and man, this unit's annoying, you guys. For only 25 points, the ability to deploy homers as well as just be this tiny unit, like our own Ripper Swarm that we can bring off the side of the board that will just be behind enemy lines. It's so easy to get this unit in a spot where it is obnoxious to kill, and it is just going to score you points over and over again. For some of the core damage of the list, we ended up bringing a Leman Russ Exterminator with a Lascannon and the 2 Plasma Sponsons, and of course the free Hunter Killer and the Heavy Stubber also came with it as well. The big thing that this has is the autocannons are, they're okay. They're strength 9, AP 1, damage 3, but more than that, after they shoot a target with this gun, they will end up shredding that armor just like with Fields of Fire. So everything else that shoots at a single target will get a bonus AP against that target. And it can double up with the Fields of Fire stratagem such that you get 2 bonus AP against anything. So you can make your Lasguns AP 2 for free, for no CP. If you want to spend 2 CP on the actual Fields of Fire stratagem, then you can additionally get 3 AP against a single target. After that, I brought a Lehman Rush Demolisher with heavy flamers all around and the Hunter Killer Heavy Stubber. And of course, the big rule of the Lehman Rush Demolisher is it's got a fantastic gun, D6 plus 3, Strength 14, AP 3, D6 damage, and it can fire into melee as well, even though its primary gun is Blast. After that, we did bring 2 units of 1 Scout Sentinel each with a Lascannon, a Chainsaw, and Hunter Killer. These guys are just really good. They point at something, and everything in your army gets to reroll ones to shoot against that target as long as you mark something within 18 inches. Now, the marking is coming up less and less in my games than I thought, simply because I'm valuing being able to do it on a turn where I really need to kill something. Whereas before, I kind of just throw it away on turn one as move blockers. I'm starting to value the reroll ones a little bit more, and so they tend to actually live a little bit longer. And one of them lived almost the entire game, and we'll talk about that when we get to it. And of course, you've already seen this unit on the thumbnail. It is a Stormsword, inspired by what we end up seeing from Robert at LVO. This unit was an absolute rockstar. We'll go over every single thing that it did over the course of all of their games. But Strength 16, D6 plus 6 shots, AP 4, Blast ignores cover, D6 plus 2 damage, and once it shoots something, everything nearby within 3 inches on a 5 up will take D3 mortal wounds. This thing kills. This thing is so strong because it also has the 4 las cannons and 5 twin-linked heavy bolters on top of that. And the Stormsword, kind of an MVP. We'll talk about how much I really like this unit and how much I'm going to think about bringing it to basically every event that I go to from here on out, just because of how much work it does. But of course, the last thing we did end up bringing, the allied unit of Callidus Assassin, has effect, has precision, has an up-down, just a really good unit for scoring as well, and a part of why this is a much more tactical-focused list than some of the other lists I've brought in the past. So with that list in mind, we should be expecting that we will win every single tank duel. It will take multiple anti-vehicle vehicles in order to take down the toughness 13, 24 wound, 2 up save, 4 up invul as long as the Enginseer is alive Stormsword. There's not a lot of units that can effectively chew through this relatively quickly, and as we'll go into the different lists that I ended up playing against, it wasn't the easiest thing for other armies to take down. And so, with that in mind, we'll go into game 1, where I played against another person named Josh and his Imperial Knights. We played the first game on Mission A, Take and Hold, Chilling Reign, and Search and Destroy. Now, the list that Josh brought was a little bit unusual in one particular way for an Imperial Knights army, but we'll get to that last. We'll talk about the normal things that we were seeing. First off, brought Canis Rex, and Canis Rex is just a beast. Sustained hits on 5s and 6s, and he does it to everything, and he's just got some great guns. On top of that, when Canis Rex dies, Sir Hector pops out and he just runs around. And you don't get the bring it down points and you don't get the assassination points until Sir Hector has died as well. And as a little lone up character running around, he doesn't do a lot, but he's really obnoxious to get to. And he's one of those fascinating characters that you see in a lot of good knight lists. The other fairly normal things we saw in Josh's list was 3 Helverins and 3 Warglaves, Eversor Assassin, and a Callidus Assassin. Now, the one tech piece that Josh brought that was really cool, that I think was really underrated now that I've seen it for the first time, is a Carassus Knight Atropos with the Mysterious Guardian enhancement. And that means that it can deep strike, but it also has an up-down. Every single turn where it's not engaged in melee, you can pick it off the board and redeploy it somewhere else with deep strike on a subsequent turn. Or on your next turn, rather. Not a subsequent one. It is just the one option. But this unit is really cool because it has a bondsman ability, and when it gives the bondsman ability out, the armature that receives it gets reroll hits and reroll wounds against titanic and towering models. Now, it is a very niche bondsman ability to give out, of course, but when it does come up, it is really, really valuable. The other big rule that the Atropos has is each time this model makes an attack that targets a monster or vehicle unit, add 1 to the hit roll. If that target is titanic or towering, also add 1 to the wound roll. Now, because the Atropos has a couple of guns in the Atropos Lascutter, the high intensity is strength 14. So you're already wounding everything in the game, I believe, on a 3 at worst. And then if it's titanic, you're wounding it on 2s. The other gun that it has, the Graviton Singularity Cannon, also strength 16. So it's wounding all of your really big things on 3s as well. If they're Titanic, it is now wounding on 2s. So this is a model that is hitting on 2s and wounding on 2s with D6 shots from the high intensity Atropos Las Cutter and D3 shots from the Graviton Singularity Cannon. So it is a little bit of swinging the number of shots that it's actually going to be getting, but it is really, really scary whenever you actually get in going up against these Titanic models. Bringing a Stormsword, we'll talk about exactly how effective this actually was. Now, getting into the actual game, as we end up going for deploying, one of the things that you have to keep in mind when doing player place terrain is when you set up your buildings and when you set up the terrain on your side of the map, you really need to make sure that there's somewhere where your Titanic units can actually move forward. Now, the Knights aren't quite as hamstrung by this because they have an oval base and they can pivot in order to actually move their units around. Stormsword and any Baneblade chassis does not have that option because it's so freaking big. It just has, I believe it's like 9 by like 7, and it's just a box, right? And you got like these little jutouts from the sponsons, but the main thing is you just need to find a spot where you can put a 7-inch gap for your Baneblade chassis to move forward. And so, whenever you set up your terrain, you need to keep that one in mind, and also you need to do it in such a way that your Stormsword will get cover on turn 1 so it doesn't just die to some of the better shooting armies. The other thing that you have is the opponent has a very telegraphed spot where it's like, this is the only place where I can put the Stormsword that is reasonable. Everything else, it will not get to move the entire game. However, the flip side to that is because it's player plays terrain and you get to put at least one piece of terrain on one objective, the big change that you see, or one of the reasons why it becomes so good, is because you can almost guarantee that any of your Baneblade chassis can shoot at least 2 of the 3 No-Man's objectives basically all the time. And so you will have this unit that is very difficult to shift, is very easy to shoot with, and can shoot at basically anything it wants on any turn. So with this in mind, Josh actually took a little bit of a more aggressive deployment approach. He put several of his Warglaives relatively far forward in his deployment zone, such that they would be shooting. They would be getting cover, but it would be a position where I was going to be able to draw a line of sight of them if I did go first. And even though it was basically impossible to fully hide the Stormsword, I was able to put it in such a position where I was going to be getting cover against him if he ended up getting the first turn. However, luckily for me, I ended up getting the first turn, and also his Atropos was in reserve, in Deep Strike reserve, so he could come in on a subsequent turn. And guys, the Stormsword is a really freaking good unit. I'll go ahead and throw up some of the stats, but the main gun alone, without lethal hits, is 60% likely to kill an Armiger by itself in a single round of shooting. On top of that, that doesn't even factor the D3 mortal wounds that you're going to be getting on a 5+. And then that'll also splash around to anything that happens to be next to it. And so on my first turn, I get some crippling damage onto my opponent. At least what I felt was crippling damage, because I killed one Armiger Warglaive and did about half of the wounds to the other one with the heavy bolters and with the Lascannons that also happened to shoot at it. And that, I mean, losing an Armiger on turn 1 isn't the end of the world, but I also got to see, and I got to feel, oh my gosh, this Stormsword is going to be doing so much damage. And the swing back that came in from Josh was nowhere near as impressive, simply because, you know, he did a little bit of shooting back, he picked up a couple of guardsmen, and I believe he ends up killing a Sentinel that I had moved towards the southeastern side of the board. And, you know, that's cool, right? Like, whatever, that Sentinel is just there. I chose not to bring it back because I really wanted the CP to kind of have a big couple of turns where I could make sure I had the CP to resurrect Deathcore Krieg every single time I wanted to, as well as have some CP to reroll the number of shots, in particular when I'm shooting with a Stormsword. However, I did make one relatively crucial mistake. I had underestimated how quickly the Eversword moves. Because it has the 9-inch move and can get advance and charge, on his first turn, he ends up hiding it behind the crate that we see right here in the middle of the board. Wasn't able to draw a line of sight on it, partly because it has the lone operative keyword as well. And it also has the Scout 9. He's able to hide it in a spot where he can then move 9 inches, advance, and shoot and charge after that, such that it is really, really difficult. He effectively gets 9 plus d6 plus 2d6 movement. So realistically, we're looking at a 19-inch threat range, realistically, for the Eversor Assassin. And I moved my Enginseer in a position where it was potentially possible for him to actually get the Eversor into the Enginseer on his turn 2. My turn 2 was much less impressive and a big swing back from Josh. To start off with, I continued moving my Stormsword towards the southeast corner, maybe in order to try and deny him from the southeast objective entirely. Just completely remove his ability to score primary. However, at the end of my turn, even though I was scoring 15 points on both the northwest, the central, and my home objective, he ended up using rapid ingress on the Atropos in order to put it right in the middle of the board. And we spent a little bit of time like finagling it around, seeing if there was a way such that he could put it behind a ruin so that I could not potentially shoot it on my turn. And we ended up determining that it was not possible because the Stormsword was really big, the ruin was not that large, and he was either going to be seen on one side of the ruin or on the other because that's just how big my vehicle was. And also just his base, right? He had to put it in a bit of a ruin such that he could not freely position it. But either way, he ends up dropping it down. And this presents an interesting moment for me because I have to decide the Exterminator and the Demolisher are not in a position where they're going to be able to contribute any damage towards hitting the Atropos. However, I have an option here where my Stormsword can choose to shoot and try and pick up, an armature in half again, kill the one that had left partial wounds before, and try and kill another one. And I didn't know the math actually shooting it into Atropos because with rotate ion shields, I'm pretty sure my likelihood of killing it if I devote an entire Stormsword into shooting it is only about 15 to 20%. I'll throw up the numbers that I had with the lethal hits, which I would not be getting, as well as not rotating ion shields. And you can see that I didn't know this at the time, but the best case scenario for a Stormsword shooting into Atropos is we only kill it about 30% of the time with all of the shooting coming in from the Stormsword. And also with lethal hits, which I did not have because I moved. So what I decided is I already knew this guy. Looked it up the morning of because I knew there were several Knights players coming, and I wanted to get like an idea of how killy the Stormsword actually was. So I ran some numbers into armatures and I ran some numbers into Lehman Russ before I came. I knew it was about a 60-ish% chance to just kill an armature outright with the main gun alone. So what I decided to do was I decided to split my fire. I shot the heavy bolters and the Lascannons into the already damaged armature, and I was able to pick that up. Then I shot the main gun at an armature Helverin that was off on the southeast corner that was threatening to move onto the southeast objective on turn 3, and I shot the main gun at it, and even though I rolled well, I believe I rolled a 4 for a total of 10 shots going into this armature, hit a bunch of them, but I believe out of 7 hits that I had, I only got 3 wounds to go through. And then he was able to save one of them on his 5-up invul, meaning that I only had 2 d6 plus 2 shots to try and take it down. And I only rolled 11 wounds, and he saved a couple of them. He ended up saving, I believe, 3 of them, actually, on the Feel No Pains. And so the Armature Helverin was taken down to 4 wounds, but a 4-wound armature is almost as effective as a normal armature already. And so I ended up using the Stormsword cannon, not doing nearly as much as I wanted with it, and crucially, as we'll see on his turn 2, he gets to swing back really hard. Yes, I'm scoring 15 points on primary in turn 2, and he's not scoring nearly as well on primary. In fact, he only scores a 5 on his home objective on his second turn, but his Eversor and his Callidus come in. The Callidus drops in Deep Strike, makes the 9-inch charge. The Eversor advances a charge, it gets into the Enginseer and rips that apart. And his Atropos does a little bit of damage shooting at the Stormsword, but with my 4-up invul, I end up saving most of it, and I believe he ends up doing about 5, 6-ish wounds to the Stormsword on his second turn. The other thing that happens is Canis Rex on the other side is able to pick up the Lehman Rush Demolisher on the second turn. And so I'm starting to lose a lot of my major firepower over the course of the board. However, I still have the Stormsword. It's still going to be able to shoot at -1 on my turn, because after he kills the Enginseer, he's able to consolidate at least the Eversor, maybe the Callidus as well, but at least the Eversor into the Stormsword. And of course, I'm not going to fall back and shoot that. I'm just going to say, well, I'll take the -1. We're going to be doing a lot of shooting. So on my third turn, I'm once again scoring quite well on the secondary front, or scoring okay on the secondary front, and I've scored my second 15 on objectives. But one of the things I do have to do is, because he gets Canis Rex into the middle objective, he ends up having enough OC such that I am required to use the duty and honor order in order to make sure that I still get a 15 on that. So that means that they don't have to take cover order. They're basically sitting in the open, and that makes them significantly less durable to any shooting they choose to put into them. On my third turn, I look at the Atropos and say, I don't think I'm killing this. And additionally, the Atropos, currently in the southeast corner, is not in a fantastic position to actually threaten my home objective in the southwest or the northwest objective. But the knight that is in a really scary position is Canis Rex. I really want to take that down, or at least put in a position where I can try and kill it with small arms fire on a subsequent turn. Maybe use the grenade stratagem in order to do the damage that I need to. So I end up sinking heavy bolter fire. I end up killing off the Eversor Assassin that's currently in melee range. And then I sink all the rest of the fire from the Stormsword into Canis Rex. And I bring him down from full HP to only 4 wounds left again. And I feel, I thought that was pretty funny, leaving both the Armiger and Canis Rex on only 4 wounds between the two turns of shooting. It's like, oh, one of these is a little bit more durable than the other one. But either way, Canis Rex ends up living, and I know that, or I guess I don't know at this point. I actually am expecting that the Stormsword will probably get another round of shooting off, just because at this point, I did not know how scary the Atropos was into Titanic vehicles. But oh boy, was I wrong. On my opponent's turn 3, my opponent is able to score 10 points on the primary, scoring his home objective in the northeast, and of course the southeast objective. And then the Wounded Armiger comes right on in, fires its autocannons at the Stormsword, and crucially, it ends up, after like hitting and wounding, it ends up getting 2 wounds through. And because I am a Stormsword, I am in cover, I have a 2-up normal save, I still have a 2-up save anyway. And I rolled double 1s on the saves. And I ended up taking 6 damage from this Wounded Armiger that I had failed to kill earlier on the Stormsword. And from there, the Atropos is also able to line up. He rolls quite well in the number of shots that he ends up having, and with all of the fire that he's putting through, the Atropos Lascutter at the high intensity is sustained hits 1, hitting on 2s, strength 14, AP 3, flat damage 4. And now, because it had moved around, my Stormsword is no longer in cover from this. So I'm going to be saving all of these on 5s. And he is able to absolutely brutally shoot, hitting on 2s, wounding on 2s for all of these guns. I don't save particularly well. The Graviton Singularity Cannon, I believe he rolls the maximum 3 shots. And also, Strength 16, AP4, D6 plus 1 shots. Absolutely shreds through the Stormsword. And it just dies on turn 3. And at this point, I'm thinking, oh no. Even though I'm doing quite well in the primary so far, I'm still scoring. My secondary is fine. My opponent is, in his 2 turns of scoring primary, he has scored the same as I scored in my 1 turn of primary. I'm really worried at this point that I just don't have the firepower. I don't have the bodies left on the board to effectively continue leading the game. And my opponent does start mounting a comeback from this point, because Canis Rex is also able to kill my other Leman Russ. So I have I might have a Sentinel left at this point, but I have no real firepower left at this point. However, as turn 4 runs around, I still score another 15 on primary. I'm still holding the one in the center. I'm still holding the northwest. I'm still holding my home objective, because very entertainingly, on my opponent's turn 3, the other funny thing that he does is, I lied a little bit earlier. Canis Rex wasn't actually the one to kill the other Leman Russ. It just died from enough fire from his Armigers at this point, just because he had been chipping it over the course of the game. The Armigers take it down. And the reason why this is really funny and really important, and why I realized that I lied to you about Canis Rex killing the other Leman Russ on turn 3, is because instead of actually shooting with Canis Rex, he marched it into my deployment zone and used Canis Rex to deploy a teleport homer. right in the middle of my deployment zone. He ends up scoring 5 points from it. On turn 4, I end up scoring 15 points on primary once again, and I draw Assassination and extend battle lines. Now, luckily, I still have just enough things across the board to make sure that I can score big extend battle lines. However, his two characters are his full health Atropos and Canis Rex that is almost dead. And I was able to kill the vehicle on turn 4, but as we touched on previously, you don't count as killing Canis Rex until Sir Hector pops out and you kill him as well. So I end up moving around, and I'm just like, well, let's like move my guys that they're a little bit harder to actually kill on turn 4, so that I can try and score as much primary on turn 5. And with Assassination and extend battle lines, hopefully I'll be able to kill Sir Hector on turn 5, because I'm not going to kill him on turn 4. He's low enough, but there's no way he can just pop out in a position where I will not be able to see him, and no matter who I shoot first with, he will be in a position to plop him down such that everything else would not be able to shoot it. So anyway, I do that. I finally kill Canis Rex, but the Atropos is now marching forward. The Armiger sitting in the southeast is still pew-pewing across the board. And on his turn 4, he does okay. He ends up scoring 10 on the primary again, holding the northeast in his home and the southeast that the Armiger is sitting on. He scores extend battle lines, and he takes hostile objective by marching Atropos into the middle of the board. But crucially, my northwestern Death Corps of Krieg are still absolutely chilling. They haven't taken a whole lot of firepower, and there's nothing that can really kill them from this position either. At the same time, Gaunt's Ghosts are still alive. And while Gaunt's Ghosts aren't the most exciting unit going into the Knights, because really all they can do is they can hope for some 6s on their sniper, and they have an autocannon, which is okay. It does some chip damage here and there. But the one thing that Gaunt's Ghosts are really good at is hunting Sir Hector. And so I end up keeping Assassination on turn 4, dropped Gaunt's Ghost in range on turn 5, shot him up on turn 5, and ended up scoring my secondaries as well. So I only get 10 points on primary on turn 5, and my opponent, for his last turn, draws Defense Stronghold and a Tempting Target. I make his Tempting Target really far away, but he's still able to move all the way over towards it in order to pick it up with the Atropos. And even though he scores 15 on his last turn of primary, and I only score 10, the comeback started a little bit too late. If we had played a 6th turn, I'm very confident that he would have been able to actually win the game. But we only played 5 turns, as you do in the current 10th edition of 40k. When all is said and done, I end up winning the game against Josh 92 to 80. And this is actually the closest game I've ever had against Knights. Knights have typically struggled going into guard most of the time, and the only time I've really lost to Knights has been Chaos Knights a couple of times, where we play on Dawn of War style deployment, or at least the hot dog, right? The long way. And I think that's the one it's called. The one where you deploy along the long board edges. Like, that one's a little bit hard because they can get enough firepower. They were able to kill my Khazarkin in 9th edition. They were able to just force my army to kind of split up too much in 10th edition. I've never really lost to Imperial Knights, but I have lost a couple times to Chaos Knights. And so this was actually a relatively close game, and I think the second closest game I've ever had against Imperial Knights. The other one was in 9th edition, where they were just able to get far enough up the board and box me into my deployment zone fairly efficiently. Anyway, that's a story that's neither here nor there. I ended up winning this game 92 to 80, and the other thing I do want to say before we move on to our next game is I really loved Josh's paint job. I forgot to get any dedicated photos of it, but he had every single one of his knights painted up as an Arizona can. And if I could get his Instagram before I actually put this video live, I'll make sure to put it in the description as well so you guys can all see it. But with that, feeling pretty good about winning game 1. Go out to lunch, grab some Taco Bell, come back, and for whatever reason, I was feeling pretty tired. So make sure to get that Baja Blast, get some, good sugar in me so that I'm ready to go for the rest of the day. In the next game, I end up playing up against Tomas and Imperial Knights again. And this time, Tomas is somebody that I had played once before in 9th edition. Really good guy. Really enjoyed talking to him. But he played Drop Pod Space Marines. I think it was Iron Warriors, but I don't know if I can still find it at this point. But he would just drop in, and his multi-meltas absolutely shredded all my tanks. And I couldn't really move far enough forward in order to create enough board presence in that one. But Anyway, Tomas won the last time they played against each other, but this time he came in and he's like, oh god, I see this Stormsword. I see you have a couple of things that are toughness 11, toughness 13. I'm not really going to be able to kill it. And that ended up being kind of prophetic for the way that this game ends up going. We end up playing on Mission L, Scorched Earth, Chilling Rain, and Dawn of War. Now, this is the long edge deployment. And Scorched Earth is the one where you can burn objectives. If you burn one in No Man's Land, at the end of the game, you'll get 5 points. And if you burn one in your opponent's deployment zone, you will get 10 points at the end of the game. So it's really hard, actually, to get maximum primary on Scorched Earth, just because you have to burn something in turns 2, 3, and 4. And if you burn an objective that you could sit on for turn 5, it doesn't actually help you. You have to burn something that you think you can't sit on for turn 5. And so that's where the big, scoring more than 40 points on primary can be pretty jeopardized for this one. But anyway, Tomas ends up playing a pretty standard list that I've seen multiple times before. He had a Knight Crusader with the Mythic Hero for the extra bondsman abilities. He had a Knight Warden with Unyielding Paragon for the basically permanent Armor of Contempt that he has, 3 Helverins, 3 Warglaves, and a Vindicare Assassin. I've seen this before. I think one of my good friends plays almost an identical list, except he doesn't have a Vindicare Assassin. He's trying to find like something else in order to just like have a little action monkey that he can put around. But anyway, going into this one, I end up going fixed. And, I was talking to Tomas a little bit about this, and I was like, I'm trying to play more tactical just to, one, get used to it for a variety of different style of lists, but also, this list is designed to do tactical. And he's like, no, Josh, you're probably going to win this game no matter what. I can't kill your army. I can't kill your damage dealers. Go fixed against me. And I was like, okay, fine. I will go deploy teleport homers and bring it down. And bring it down is, a free 20 points going up against knights if you have anything that can kill them. Deploy teleport homer is also really hard for them to deal with, especially on the Dawn of War deployment, because the deployment zone is so large. It's so easy to sneak things into the opponent deployment zone in order to get the 4 points and deploy teleport homers every turn. Tomas, though, ended up going tactical, and I mean, there's not really another good choice for knights. It's part of why they've been struggling so much, but we'll go into how unlucky his draws ended up being over the course of the game. So once again, I'm able to deploy the Stormsword in such a way and the terrain such that it can realistically shoot, as long as it's alive, at 4 of the 5 objectives on the board at any given time. On any given turn, I can realistically hit 4 of them. And because he's knights, he doesn't have a lot of things that can hide particularly well if they want to be on the objectives. It just means that it can pick and choose its targets basically as much as I want. And on turn 1, we end up rolling off. We end up deploying it fairly wide. I get the first turn, and between a number of hunter killers coming out from my Lehman Russes, between the reroll 1s that I get off of a Scout Sentinel that move forward, I kill the Knight Warden outright. It's just dead. It dies on turn 1 because he was not able to fully hide it. Even though he's getting cover, I can use the free fields of fire. I can use the Exterminator to get plus 2 AP on every single gun. That means heavy bolters have AP 3. That is putting the Knight Warden on an invul by itself with heavy bolters. And even with the Unyielding Paragon and with the Rotate Ion Shells to get the 4 up, I just rolled really hot. I believe it was a 5, so I got 11 shots off the Stormsword concussion cannon and just killed it. And what made things a little bit worse after that was as soon as I killed it, the Knight Warden exploded. And to Tomas's credit, Tomas was seeming to be having a great time, no matter what. Even as his Knight Warden died on turn 1 and exploded and did, I think, 5 mortal wounds altogether to the knight that was next to it, the Crusader, and also doing, well, no, I did like 1 to the Crusader, but did like 4 mortal wounds to the Helverin that was standing next to it. And then I even rolled the 5 up on the concussion part of the Stormsword cannon and did an extra 2 wounds. So the Helverin that was standing next to the Crusader, or excuse me, next to the Warden that was out of line of sight, ended up taking like 5 mortal wounds after not getting shot a single time. And that was brutal, right? Because this is already putting some of his most important units across the board just out of commission or no longer nearly as combat effective before the game really even begins for Tomas. His turn one was a little bit less impressive overall. He nudges his Crusader into the building, which had open first floors, which was interesting actually. All of the big L-shaped ruins had open first floors for this tournament. I'm not sure why that was the decision made. It's not something I'm used to doing, but he ends up using it, and he actually kills most of one of my Death Korps of Krieg 20 blocks, but crucially end up living with like 3 or 4 models, including the one with the meta pack, as well as the Death Korps Marshal. And so even after they all died, I was like, well, turn 2, I will just be hiding them behind the ruin and slowly rezzing them up so that I will get the +1 to hit, +1 to wound later. But anyway, he does that, and that is basically all the real damage that he does on his turn 1. He tries to put a little bit of fire into the Stormsword, very quickly realizes that it's fruitless, and to make things even worse, the only objective that he could score, he ended up drawing extend battle lines and behind enemy lines, and he could not get behind enemy lines because he has a Vindicator. He also tries to use the Shield Breaker round on the Vindicator to shoot at the Stormsword just to get, like, you know, because he needs a 6 in order to get the damage, and I think it's like D3 plus 3 or some. It's actually a pretty good, it's like single shot that you can try and put into something, but he needs to roll a 6 in order to even wound the Stormsword, so it ends up not doing a whole lot. He didn't have any characters he could really shoot at with the Vindicator. But he ends up scoring only 5 points on his first turn, whereas I had killed a knight for 5 points and bring it down, and had done deploy teleport homers in the middle of the board with a sentinel. After that, after killing the knight, though, I tried to do a similar thing up against Tomas on my turn 2 as I had done to Josh on the previous turn 2, where I tried to kill 2 armigers. And there was one that had taken a bunch of damage previously from just the mortal wounds from the explosion and from the concussion, and another one that was full HP. And, you know, I was like, okay, fine. We'll put, like, the Lascannon and the bolters into the weakened one, and we'll try and shoot the other one that's full HP. And I didn't kill either of them. Weirdly enough, the one that was already injured took I think I brought it down to, like, 5, so it wasn't even bracketed. And the other one, I just rolled a 2 on my number of shots, so I only had 8 shots coming out with the giant gun, and just failed to wound on that one. So he ends up living with both the armigers. But ultimately, it didn't really matter that much because my opponent's turn 2, yes, he got his 10 points for controlling 2 objectives. And that's what I was sad about, was I used the main gun trying to kill one on the objective, so he would only score 5 points on primary. He ends up drawing cleanse and capture enemy outpost. So he's not getting to my home objective. It's just too far for anything. And then he chooses not to score a cleanse because he needs all the action economy of his army in order to shoot everything that he can in order to try and do some real damage. But at this point, like, I think he kills a Leman Russ with a Warglaive by moving it in and getting the melt up +4 on both the shots that end up getting through the armor. He ends up actually killing one of my Leman Russes, but ultimately, after that, there is not a lot left because I was able to move everything else out. The one armiger that survived from the main gun previously ends up moving to a position where my really weakened Death Korps of Krieg that he had shot up on turn 1 move out. They throw a grenade at it, and then the main gun and the Stormsword do not fail a second time. They're able to pick up 2 more armigers here, and my opponent is just out of things. I don't think he has a single armiger left effectively after turn 3. Like, everything is just dead. So on his turn 3, he's like, well, I have the Crusader left and the Vindicator left. I guess I'll cleanse this objective. And he also drew Storm Hostile objective. So he didn't even score. He didn't even have another secondary that he could score, just because he could not get onto any of the objectives reasonably because they were just too far away. And so after that, we rolled a couple of dice, but the game was effectively over. I was able to burn an objective, and I was even able to kill the Crusader on turn 5 with the Stormsword, the reroll ones, and able to take everything down. And so at the end of the game, all he had left was a Vindicare Assassin hanging out on his home objective, scoring him 5 points of primary per turn. And guys, this was probably the shortest, maybe most one-sided game I've played against a reasonably strong player. Um, right, like most of the time I'm playing up against reasonably strong players, and I'll give Tomas more credit than that. I would say he was probably one of the stronger players that was actually at the event. And as I take a quick look, yeah, Tomas was the sixth highest ranked player at this event of 34 players, both by points per event as well as just ITC ranking. He ends up getting ninth overall. Like this is not a player that you normally see blown out like this, and this was probably the biggest blow I've had in 10th edition because it tends to be really easy to score, but he couldn't do anything to my vehicles at all, basically the entire game, and so he ended up just kind of losing to the Stormsword almost by itself. And so I do want to give a lot of credit to Tomas because I really enjoyed playing against him. He was actually another one of the Git Hammers. So was Josh, my first opponent, and Tomas, both Git Hammer players, just having a good time. And even while Tomas was getting completely cooked, he was having a great time. We got to talk about a lot of things because the game was so one-sided and because he's playing knights and we didn't have to use up that much time because of how quickly all of his turns were going. It was a very straightforward game where we ended up taking it pretty chill for the most part. Ended up effectively tabling him on turn 4 and ended the game from that position. But honestly, would love to play Tomas again. We're currently 1-1 in tournaments against each other, and hopefully we'll get to play against each other at another event soon. But anyway, I did not feel at this point as though my list had really been tested. I brought this Stormsword to try and see if I could do it up against some armies that I typically have not had a whole lot of success against. And as I said before, I don't lose to knights basically ever. I've lost one game to knights. He was actually my practice partner, who I think I'm like 6-0 against in practice games, but 0-1 against in tournaments. That's the only knights player that I think I've ever lost to. So I don't feel like I've been tested with this. In game 3, I take a look. The tournament had, obviously number of wins as the first metric, but our first tiebreaker was strength of schedule. And so I was looking at it, and I thought I was going to be playing up against a guy named Nick, who is also a guard player. And he's got a really scary list that is a really good attrition-based list that kind of reminds me of some of the things I have done well at a number of GTs. I thought for sure I was playing him. And if either of us won, both of us had a chance to win the event based on the fact that we both had okay strength of schedule scores going into it. However, I believe the third round was also randomly paired within the, within each win bracket. And so instead of going up against Nick and his guard, who I had played at the previous RTT that I talked I don't know if I talked about that on stream. But anyway, I played against him in another RTT, which I ended up winning because we flipped a coin. Game 3, I ended up playing up against Evan, another Githammer player, and his Votan. And funnily enough, Evan is a player that is going to be on my CTC team, and he's planning to play Votan at that one as well. This is his first recorded event in this ITC season, so I didn't know a whole lot about what to expect against him other than that he was playing Votan. And we played our third game of the day. We both knew going into it that if either of us won, we had a chance of winning, of course, based on how our other opponents did and whether they got a strong enough strength of schedule score for us to win. But the game that I played up against Evan was on Mission O, Vital Ground, Chilling Rain, and Crucible of Battle. And he was bringing a rather unusual Votan list that I haven't really seen brought out a whole lot. But he had a Brokir Ironmaster, an Einherjar Champion, 2 calls, one of them with the Grim Demeanor Enhancement. Grim Demeanor Enhancement allows him to reroll Battleshock tests and ignore in-your-all modifiers made to their characteristics and in-your-all rolled in tests made by them. He had 1 unit of 10 Hearthkin that he ended up splitting into 2 units of 5 via the usage of the Sagittar. He had 2 units of 3 Thunderkin, each with the Graviton blast cannons that ended up going in land fortresses, one of which had a conversion beamer, and the other one of which had a Magna Rail. He had 2 units of 10 Einherjar Hearthguard, and while I know a lot of Votan players normally bring the Volkite Disintegrators, he chose to bring the grenade launchers and the plasma guns instead. we touched on, he had the 2 land fortresses, and then after that, he had 2 units of 3 Hearthkin Pioneers. Now, I have had a lot of trouble playing up against Votan in the past. One of my typical practice partners has also been playing a lot of Votan at a number of events that he's been going to, and also in a lot of our practice games. And I have found that in many ways, it feels as though Votan are guard but better. Right, Sagittars are really scary. They're just better than Chimeras in almost every way. Um, and all of his infantry, because because Votan have had so many points reductions, the Hearthkin are actually just kind of better guardsmen in a lot of ways. He can outshoot me, he can out melee me, uh, and so it does feel as though Votan, especially with their access to a lot of free CP, if they kill some of their Judgment token targets, it's very difficult in my experience for me to beat Votan in 10th edition. I did not have nearly as much trouble in 9th edition, but in 10th edition it has been very much of an uphill battle for me. The other thing that was really interesting about this is because we were doing Vital Ground, that's the one that removes the objective in the middle of the board. And so it does mean that you score 2 for your home objective, 5 for everyone in No Man's Land, and 6 if you do control your opponent's home objective. But, as we'll get into it, one of my major strategies whenever I play this one is just divide the board in half, right? If we can score even primary for the game, and if we're both getting 7 for our home objective and the primary, I can usually outscore a lot of armies on the secondary game in this one. And if I'm able to take the other objective, great. If not, then we just call the primary a draw. As we set up, I do a very similar thing where I am able to put my Stormsword in a position where if it just moves towards the center of the field, I can absolutely cover my home objective, I can cover the northwest objective, and I will be able to shoot some parts of the northeast objective, because whenever I play guard, you generally want to play such that you're playing the short orge. You generally want to play the game such that you can turn the game into a short edge deployment style game. Even if that's not how you actually deploy, that's what you want to make the game feel like. And so I've basically said, if I can control the southeast objective at some point, cool. But I'm probably going to mostly give that up. I'm going to play for the northwest objective and maybe his home objective if I can. So if we end up doing a yin-yang, cool. Either way, but I move the Stormsword out, and I deploy it such that it can control that, and being in the middle of the board, I don't really think my opponent has a lot of tools to actually kill it. He has a couple of Sagittars that are setting, or one of which will go to each side objective. He has Pioneers that are going to go to each objective, and he has 2 units of 10 Hearthguard that are both starting the game on the board, which did surprise me a little bit. One of them looked like it was planning to move towards the middle, and he had told me that he had played up against a Knight player in the previous round, and the Knight player could not kill him. It just bathed in fire, and he did like the, kind of like if you've ever seen the old Platoon movie where they just sit there and just soaking up fire, except instead of dying, he loved it, right? It was just the kind of thing where he had an expectation that his Hearthguard were going to be a lot tankier going into my army than they actually ended up being. But one of them was going to move towards the southeast objective, one of them was going to move towards the center, and had the freedom to kind of move in either direction if it wanted to. For this, we were also both playing tactical. It's definitely harder to try and deploy teleport homers consistently going up against the Votan, and because we had just like this completely empty center of the board, I did not want to sacrifice a unit every single turn trying to deploy a homer there for the 3 points. And it's like, well, at that point, I don't really have anything cleansed. I can't really cleanse objectives. Like I could get mini cleanse every turn, so there wasn't really anything good for it. But anyway, turn 1 comes around, and I once again win the roll off in order to go first. But it starts off, it's a lot more difficult than that. We both roll, see who goes first, and we both roll a 1. And then we have to roll again, and we both roll a 2. So finally, we roll a third time. I roll a 5, and I think Evan ends up rolling a 3. So finally, we know I'm going first. So my first turn, I do all the normal things. Hey, everything has +1 ballistic skill. These guys have +1 save. Cool beans. And I end up moving my Stormsword out into a position where it can draw a line of fire up against, I I believe it was the Hernkin Pioneers and one of his land fortresses, because one land fortress was going to play for the northwest, one land fortress was going to play for the southeast. And I open up fire. I put heavy bolters into the Pioneers. I put the everything else into the land fortress. And also I move some things such that they are able to get onto the northwest objective on turn 3, because I did not want to give a ton of free fire to the Sagittar and the bikes that were coming out towards the northwest. I moved my Scout Sentinel towards the southeast in order to sit on that objective, because I had drawn extend battle lines, needed to get that one. I also drew capturing outpost. That one was never happening on turn 1. Anyway, going into the actual shooting, I ended up rolling pretty well. I ended up rolling, I believe it was a 4 on the number of shots, for 10 shots from the main gun, and then I have my Lascannons. And after all is said and done, with the big shots coming out from the main gun, with the Lascannons as well, I get 3 of the main gun shots through, and maybe 1 Lascannon through. But I end up taking the damage rolls and slow rolling them, because D6 plus 2, maximum 8 damage per shot. The land fortress has 16 wounds total. I slow roll my dice. First one, roll a 1. Alright, well, we're going to CP reroll that one. Reroll it into a 3. It's like, okay, cool. That turns it from a 3 damage to a 5 damage. And then you just roll the other 2. I roll a 2 and a 1. So overall, I get 6 damage on the dice, plus 6 damage just built in, for 12 damage total. And then, the one Lascannon shot that ends up getting through, I roll another 1 on the damage. And I'll put up on screen the amount of damage that just the Stormsword cannon by itself is expected to do to a land fortress. It is supposed to kill a land fortress 62% of the time by itself, without taking into account the Lascannons at all. But I left the land fortress on 2 wounds after all of that. I also pick up, I believe, one of the bikes with the heavy bolters, and I do a little bit of damage with the Exterminator, trying to pick up a little bit more on that side as well. However, I end up killing nothing, but I've crippled the land fortress on turn 1 already, which is a huge bonus. And then I want to apologize to Evan right off the bat, because I don't think I've ever seen a worse round of shooting from a shooting army. He ends up bringing out his land fortress into the middle of the board. It only has 2 wounds, and when it moves in range of my Demolisher cannon, I was like, okay, well, yeah, I have enough CP. I will still have enough to reinforce something if I need it to. I overwatch it, and I end up rolling 3 6s on 8 dice from a number of shots, and everything else was out of range because it was like flamers, right? But the main gun goes through, and because it's AP 3, he's still saving on 4s. 2 shots end up getting through the normal save of the land fortress, which means that because each of them are D6, that's a dead land fortress. And so I end up killing the land fortress on his turn 1. And then he opens up with all of his fire. He drops the Thunderkin out of the land fortress as they disembark. He shoots a bunch of small arms fire into infantry, and he takes his 1 unit of Hearthguard, and they take pot shots at the Stormsword with the plasma guns. And for whatever reason, he needed to hit a lot of things on 3s. The number of 1s and 2s he rolled, I swear, he rolled 60% of his dice for hitting. He was rolling 1s and 2s. He was not doing any damage whatsoever. And so the Stormsword, I think it took 2 wounds after everything had shot on it. I lost 3 guardsmen out of 1 unit, 1 guardsman out of another unit, and the Sagittar only did 3 wounds to one of my Lehman Russes. And the Sagittar, I have seen that thing kill a Rogel Thorn tank in 1 round of Overwatch, because if you hit the sustained D3 and roll high on your sustained hits, I mean, those are basically Lascannons that you're just taking up, and it has done an entire Rogel Thorn in 1 turn of Overwatch. This one did 3 wounds to a Lehman Russ. And, I mean, Obviously, Evan was frustrated. I would have been frustrated too, because it was not an interesting game from that point on because his first turn was a waste. Uh, I did some healing with the Enginseer. I brought a couple models back. Effective damage that he had done after I res models and healed was 3 damage, 3 wounds to a Rogaldorn, and 2 guardsmen had effectively died on his entire first round of shooting. And then I cleaned up, right? Immediately after that, on my turn 2, where I only scored 2 points of primary, I got Assassination and Tempting Target. And because I had a Death Korps of Krieg unit that had moved out to the southeast, such that I could take that objective on turn 2 if I needed to, and I had another blob out by the northwest, such that it was absolutely going to take the northwest objective, he was like, well, I guess I want your Death Korps of Krieg to come closer to my Hearthguard so I can charge them, so let's put the tempting target in the southeast. I'm like, cool. Um, but I also had Gaunt's Ghost come up, and the assassination going into the Iron Master was going to be very easy for me to do. And so on my turn 2, I picked up the Sagittar and all of the bikes that are in the northwest objective. He now had nothing left on the board that could realistically come take this back ever. So I was already in a fantastic position. I had already hit my draw on primary that I expected to. Also, Gaunt's Ghost comes down. They kill off the Iron Master, and I do a fair amount of damage to the Sagittar as well, just from the number of small arm shots that are going into the unit, and the Death Korps of Krieg help kill off the rest of the Iron Master unit. They also do a little bit of damage to the Sagittar, and then when I charge the Sagittar as well, I get so many bodies onto the southeast objective, I'm able to score a tempting target as well. And at this point, like I said, the northwest, he has nothing left that can really contest. He's got some Hearthguard. A couple of them died in the middle as the Stormsword opened up into it, but he did pretty good on his saves, at least for that. And so, yeah, I'm in control of the northwest objective, the southeast objective, and in control of the middle of the board at this point. And so, on his turn 2, well, he had a little bit more success. It's hard to do worse than his turn 1. He ended up shooting down. He ended up killing almost all of the Death Korps of Krieg that were on the southeast objective, but crucially did not quite kill all of them. And with his objectives being capture enemy outposts and behind enemy lines, the only thing he could really do to score on this one, because he only scored 2 on primary for holding his home objective, was able to teleport his Einherjar champion into my deployment zone because I was only using my Gaunt's Ghost to screen out the backfield, because I knew he didn't have a whole lot of reserves to really for him to really deal with. And so on his turn 2, he ends up scoring only 3 points on secondary and only cleans up a little bit of damage. And I even told him at this point, it's like, hey, it's probably worth it that you have the one remaining Hearthkin warrior in the northwest, which of course is not going to do anything. You probably want to charge it into me so it dies on my turn, or it dies on his turn, such that I can't kill it for no prisoners or overwhelming force points. And he's like, yeah, I guess. I think it charges in, it maybe kills the guardsman, and then of course it dies to the clapback from the Death Korps of Krieg. They actually have surprisingly good melee, because they have the Death Korps Marshal has 4 attacks, and each sergeant has, I believe it's 3 attacks with power weapons. So you just have a lot of, no, 2 attacks. So they just have a lot of attacks with power weapons that come out from a guard unit. But anyway, the game is still pretty effectively over at this point, because on my turn 3, I draw Storm Hostile Objective and Area Denial. So Storm Hostile Objective, I had a little bit of a devious plan at this point, because almost all of his remaining army had moved out to the southeast. And so what I ended up doing is I pick up the Gaunt's Ghost and Callidus, deep strike both of them and the Scions into his backfield, and I guess I also brought the Cyclops, which just chilled there for the rest of the game. And I brought all 3 of these units to be within 9 inches of the Hearthkin warriors that were on his home objective. And the rest of it, like, there was some little bit of shooting. I killed all of the rest of the Hearthguard that were in the middle of the board, and did a little bit of damage to the Hearthguard that were on the southeast objective. And I think I actually killed the Thunderkin with the main gun coming out from the Stormsword. But again, he only had a couple of units left on the board. And crucially, when I deep striked all 3 of these units into his backfield, I decided I am not going to shoot with a single one of these units. because I'm going to put all of them 9 inches away, I'm just going to take my 4 chances, so 3 different charges and the 1 CP reroll, in order to try and make as many 9-inch charges as I can. And so, after killing off most of the Hearthguard in the middle, after killing off some Thunderkin off on the southeast objective, I then charged the Gaunt's Ghost. And this was the one that I was most interested in actually making sure I made the charge, because they are probably the most killiest in melee, just because the sheer number of attacks that they put out. And so, failed the first one, CP rerolled, got it on the second charge. Then I rolled for the Callidus and also got that one in. Then I rolled for the Scions, but ended up failing that one. So I got 2 of the 3 units in, absolutely slaughtered the Hearthkin that were holding his home objective in melee between the Callidus and Gaunt's Ghost. And then I took his home objective from that. So I scored Storm Hostile objective, but I did not score Area Denial on this because I could not get him out of 3 inches of the center of the board. Evan's game from that position was basically over because I had taken his home objective. He only scored 5 points on primary on his turn 3 on the southeast objective. He did not have enough bodies to do basically anything else on his turn. And so when he drew Deploy Teleport Homer and Secure No Man's Land, he was going to get mini No Man's Land because he was only going to control 1 in the southeast. And Deploy Teleport Homer, he could not do that in my objective because I had also killed the Einherjar champion that was chilling in my backfield. And so he ended up moving the last guy, the Hessier, I believe it's called, or maybe it was the Call, into the middle of the board to deploy Teleport Homers. He scored 3 points there. He scored 2 points on Secure No Man's Land. And I think at this point he also kills Ursula Creed, I think. But he was not going to be able to get me off of my home objective at all. And so, turn 4, I end up keeping Area Denial from turn 3, score that by moving my Stormsword into the middle of the board and killing off the Call that was still there. And then for Secure No Man's Land, I only got, the small 2 points enough for controlling 1 objective in No Man's Land. But crucially, I was scoring 13 on primary for controlling my home objective, 1 No Man's Land, and my opponent's home objective for 6 points. And kind of like rub salt in the wound, Evan had another really unlucky draw on his secondary objectives for his turn 4. As he ended up drawing Storm Hostile Objective, and he was not close enough to take any objective from me. He drew Investigate Signals, and he just only had things in one corner of the board, so he could maybe get 2 points of that. He spent a CP to re-roll Investigate Signals, and instead got Bring It Down. And the only vehicle that he had in range that he could do any damage to was a full health Stormsword. So he ended up getting no points on secondary in his turn 5 and only primary. And at that point, the game was effectively over, because we just talked out the 5th turn. I scored 6 points on Investigate Signals, and I had multiple units in his backfield for 5 points on behind enemy lines. I scored another 13 on primary in turn 5. And in his turn 5, I didn't have enough firepower that could 1, see, and 2, get enough of his guys off of the southeast objective. It was like, yeah, no, this is not worth it. He ends up scoring 5 points on primary, and when he draws something new, he at least gets no prisoners. I don't even remember what he killed. Oh, yeah, he finally is like, okay, well, what's left of my Hearthguard goes and will mop up the 4 or 5 models of Death Korps of Krieg that have just been hanging out over in the southeast corner behind an obscuring ruin, so that he didn't want to waste time going to kill them before. He ends up picking them up for 2 points there. But at the end of it, guys, this is a kind of short tournament after action report, because the way that this game ended was 83 points to the guard and 45 points to the Votan. And I ended up going 3-0 at this event, where I beat Imperial Knights in a fairly close game. I beat Imperial Knights again in a not close game. And then I beat Votan in another not close game. And I felt a little bit bad about this third game because it was not a game because of how bad his shooting phase was. He just did not have the tools to kill me. And kind of looking back at it, one of the things that I think might have changed the game a little bit was I was not terribly impressed with the foot slogging Hearthguard, right? I am so used to seeing Hearthguard teleported in, such that you can pick your target, do a lot of shots with the grenade launchers, and also the Volkite disintegrators mean that you actually have a lot of threat against most vehicles just due to the fact that they have devastating wounds built into them. I did not feel particularly tested in this event because one, I had two good matchups, one of which could not kill the Stormsword, and then the Votan, I was also were pretty sure we're not going to have a lot of success killing the Stormsword, and because I killed one of the land fortresses on my opponent's turn one, he absolutely did not have enough firepower to deal with this unit. And so I was very, very impressed with the Stormsword, but I do want to withhold a little bit of judgment overall on this unit because it didn't really get tested. Again, nothing could kill it in the games except for the Carassus Knight of Trapos, which absolutely like chewed through it, but it chewed through it too late into the game for it to matter. Overall, though, as I said, I went 3-0 at this event and ended up getting second on account of the strength of schedule being the number one tiebreaker that we were using. And so, turns out that the guy who ended up getting first, his name was Justin, ended up having a situation where all of his other opponents that he played ended up going 2-1 themselves. Whereas one of my opponents, Josh, ended up going 1-2, but both Tomas and Evan ended up going 2-1. And so, I had a strength of schedule of 1.67, and Justin had a strength of schedule of 2.0 because everyone had won out except for their games against him. So ultimately, I felt pretty good about this. I ended up going 3-0, getting second at this event with 34 players, and more than that, even more than the games, because the games were, I don't want to say boring, because they weren't boring, but they were not games where I really had to do more than just kind of play my list, if that makes sense. I didn't really have a lot of situations where I had a lot of difficult decisions that I needed to make. I am going to try and bring a similar style of list to another RTT in the near future so I can get more experience against a wider variety of armies with it and hopefully play up against people as well. But the thing that I really enjoyed about this was uh, one of the people who was there, his name is Sage, who I played against his Drukari at the last event at this location. He had invited me to say, hey, we're looking for a couple more people to fill out teams for the CTC for Githammer. Would you like to play with us? And like I said, with all the Githammer players there, got to introduce myself to a lot of different people. They're all super cool. Really looking forward to the CTC event. And honestly, I can't wait to go back to another event here just because the TO was really good, very knowledgeable, very helpful, and there was at least one brand new player there who was not having, he did not have a great time for his first game, was considering dropping, but instead, he was convinced to stick around and continue playing games, and I think he actually had a much better time in his second and third games as well, in large part due to the fact that TO was very willing to help him out. So that's going to be wrapping up everything here for the New Year New Wa RTT hosted by Githammer at the Squad Marks location in the greater Los Angeles area. For a couple of brief notes on future plans, like I had said before, I am trying to start uploading battle reports relatively soon. I was planning to record one tomorrow, but the data slate has not come out yet, and so I was going to be waiting for that to come out before I start recording content, just so that it is relevant to what everybody is going to be doing up in the near future. I'm not currently registered for any events coming up, but I'm planning to do something every about 2 weeks, and so I was just waiting to make sure I got my work schedule such that I could go to another one. So expect another one of these tournament after action reports in about 2 weeks. And like I said, I'm also planning to go to the California Team Championships with the Githammer Git Posers. And like I said, we're going to be playing with a couple of cool guys. Evan, one of my teammates, Sage, the guy who invited me, will also be playing, and then Luis as our team captain. Still not sure who our fifth person is. I know they know who it is, but I didn't have a chance to introduce myself to them. So we will be able to go to that at the CTC. It'll be my first ever Teams event, and maybe at the next event that you see, I will be trying to play a list that I will likely be playing for this event. And so, maybe a bit of a hint, but one of my friends is printing some big beefy boys for me to try playing with a little bit at the next event. A couple other notes before I close things out. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe. I'm hoping to do this while right now it has just been a passion project. I am hoping to be able to do this as a way to maybe supplement my income. So if there are things that you guys would like to see for potential memberships or Patreon stuff, let me know. I am going to be putting up some of my thoughts on the data slate when it does eventually come out, and just talk about the way that is going to be affecting Guard in my eyes. I will be doing that, and if there are things that you guys would really like to hear from me whether it be Warhammer related or League of Legends related. Let me know, and I'll be sure to upload that as soon as I can. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. It really helps with the algorithm as well. If I can hit the 1,000 subscriber mark, then we can actually start making at least a little bit of money off the advertising side. I know you guys are kind of forced to watch anyway, so help me help you at least get something. I can get more models and make this much cooler endeavor over the next couple of years. So thank you so much for tuning in. This has been Joshua Joshi Howard, and I will see you guys all next time.